Hey everyone, my name is Megan Brett, and this is my YouTube video on planning for instruction. Planning for instruction refers to decisions made about organizing, implementing, and evaluating instruction. The goal for planning is to ensure student learning. Planning helps by creating, arranging, and organizing instructional events to enable learning objectives, and that learning occurs. Curriculum considerations when planning are curriculum standards that are influenced by InTASC, Common Core standards, and professional organizations, and Common Core curriculum, which also include 21st century skills. Curriculum standards are influenced by InTASC, professional organizations, Common Core standards, and the National Council of Teachers of Math. State and local curriculum frameworks are frameworks in an organized set of standards that define what the student should know and be able to do. The Common Core curriculum is a state initiative which is state-led, and their effort is to develop a clear and consistent curriculum framework to prepare students for college and the workplace or the workforce. Over 40 states have adopted this Common Core standard. The Common Core standard is available for math and English from K through 12. The 21st century skills, it refers to certain Common Core competencies, which include collaboration, digital literacy, critical thinking skills, and problem-solving skills. The 21st century skills, it must be taught in the core academic subjects as well, and that includes global awareness, financial, economic, business, and interpretation literacy, civic literacy, health literacy, and environmental literacy. Types of teacher plans. The first important type is backwards mapping, which is also known as backward design. And it is at start of planning. At the start of planning, you have to identify, which is intended learning outcomes, how students are expected to demonstrate their learning achievement at the end of the instruction. Then you plan backwards. And you plan backwards by designing instructional activities that focus on those learning outcomes. So you start with that part and you work your way backwards to get back to the beginning. The first step is to identify desired results, essential goals, developing essential questions, and the essential content. Next, you back it up to identify assessment. You need to identify the assessment, the evidence for use during and after the instruction. And finally, like I said, you have to back it up. And you back it up to further identify the learning plan, which are the major learning activities and lessons that you will develop. And you back it up when planning the entire course. The terms of the course, the units, the weekly plans, and the daily plans, and how you're going to incorporate all of that into that 1 week and separate it into daily instruction. The second is the linear rational approach to planning, which is the formulation of aims and goals. The aims are the broad statements about the intent of education, which is considered the most broad. And the goals, they are translations of aims into more specific subject-related terms. Specific meaning they are the most specific. The specification of objectives, and the objectives are translation of goals for use in the unit planning and lesson planning to identify student learning outcomes, which are the most specific. The next is the assessment of student needs. These are to use assessment information to guide instructional planning. You need to conduct some assessment prior to instruction to find out the student's prior knowledge about the next unit of the instruction. Even though you haven't taught it yet, you need to know what they are familiar with and what they can use to help them to learn that new material. You also need to use student interest, backgrounds, problems, and needs, and use those student strengths and weaknesses in order to help them understand and comprehend in that new unit. The next is strategies of learning activities. Select instructional strategies that will enable students to learn the material and reach the student learning outcomes. You can use a variety of instructional strategies, and those should be used to differentiate instruction. They all learn in their own way, and that assessment will help you to gather that information to help them in the best way you can. And you need to evaluate your students' performance. And you're going to evaluate it by the background mapping, plans for evaluation, student performance, and those are made even before the instruction begins. Various types of assessments should be conducted. Don't use just one, use many different types. And resources for planning, you have to use curriculum guides, curriculum materials from the State Department of Education or professional organizations. Teacher's edition of the textbook, other textbooks, professional journals, and web-based resources. Teacher-student planning. Teacher does not make all the decisions about the curriculum and instruction. Students are involved in the planning and decision-making. Having their input will help you to keep their interest in it, make them more engaged in the instruction as you teach. Another important resource is team planning. 2 or more teachers collaboratively prepare instructional plans. Preparing a syllabus, a written statement about the content, procedures, and requirements of a particular course. I think we're all familiar with that, taking UNCP courses. Response to intervention, which is the RTI, and that requires that teachers assess students and provide levels of support for students who need assistance. This is to make those accommodations for those who need that special care and special assistance for them. Most RTI models include 3 levels or tiers. Planning lessons and units, setting goals and objectives, converting standards into objectives. Teachers need to examine a subject-specific course goal and break it down into several more specific objectives at the unit level, and then break those united objectives into units and into instructional objectives and that are going to be used daily in the lessons. Don't just make them for one day. You need to have the same objectives pertaining with the same goal for each day because it is one set unit. Types of instructional objectives. You have behavioral objectives, which is they specify student actions, testing conditions, and performance criteria. For example, after practicing in small groups with the students, they will solve 10 problems with 80% accuracy. The next type of objective is a descriptive objectives. They indicate what students are to learn without language that specifies observable behavior. For example, describes the function of, say, the digestive system. Objectives within the learning domains. Cognitive domain is the development of intellectual abilities and skills. Affective domain is the development of attitudes, beliefs, and values. Psychomotor domain is the coordination of physical movements and performances. In the levels of cognitive domain, you have high-level objectives. They are levels 1 through 6, and you're going to work your way. 6 being creativity, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, and number 1 would be remembering, and they're going from low to high. 1 to 6, 6 being the highest and 1 being the lowest, which are lower level objectives. The next is planning lessons. This is the most important part to me. Planning lessons, you have the first part, parts of an effective lesson, which include introductory activities, developmental activities, and closing activities. You need to have these set up for each part. The next part, you have lesson plans that format. The lesson plan format. You need a template that has a separate section to record all of the types of standard information you need in a lesson plan. There is no single lesson plan format. No list of universally adopted components of a lesson plan. The next part you have is a sample lesson plan format, which includes course information, standards addressed in the lesson, objectives of the lesson, materials, possible questions, beginning at the lesson actions, middle of the lesson, and the ending of the lesson. Then you have the planning units, which include resources and factors in unit planning, the components of the unit plan, and strategies to a successful implementation of the unit plans. The next part of components of a unit plan. You have the overview, rationale, educational objectives and essential questions, outline of the content, calendar that sequences the daily lessons, what you're going to do each day, daily lesson plans which go into more detail and specify what you're going to do that day, and you also need to make sure you have your materials and resources. And the last part, applying the SIOP, the SIOP model, into planning, which include lesson preparations and building background. There's a lot to lesson plan, which is why it is important to reach the goal of planning. And the goal of planning, which we discussed in the beginning, is to ensure that the student is learning. Thanks so much. Have a good day.